Hey, it's Liz D'Alto, and this is the Untamed the Wild Soul Woman podcast. From body image, sex, spirituality, money and relationships, to motherhood, creativity, business, communication, and desire, Untamed the Wild Soul Woman is the place to come for real stories and powerful advice to help you reclaim and redefine womanhood in the 21st century. Liz D'Alto here, creator of Wild Soul Movement, and your host for Untamed the Wild Soul Woman. And I am enjoying these conversations so much. So whether this is the first one in the series you're watching or you've also been tuning in to several, thank you for joining us. And today I have with me Michaela Boehm. And Michaela, you know, she's not a coach. She's not a therapist. She's kind of a sorceress, if you will. She works with men and women around topics of sex and intimacy and relationships and really embodying male and female essences, understanding what that is. And I know who Michaela is, actually, because my partner, Mike Rostowski, which, by the way, women, is hosting a symposium for men, if you want to get your men in on this goodness. Mike met Michaela doing a workshop either last year or the year before, and she spoke at his conference, the Conference for Men last year. So, Michaela, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, hello, and thanks for having me.
You are welcome. I love, and also everyone watching, one of the things that I really appreciate about Michaela, you know, under this whole context of Untamed the Wild Soul Woman, is a piece of no longer apologizing for being a woman. I think that's something a lot of women do, for having emotions, for saying what we want to say, for being who we are. And I'll tell you a quick little, it's not an anecdote, but when I first came across Michaela and I friended her on Facebook, I was like, man, like this lady is intense, because people would say things and she will just rip people a new one. And at first it was like really triggering me. I'm like, who is this bitch? But it's not. It's just who you are, and it's your fierce, like that Kali energy, just like takes no shit, and I really dig it. So I want to ask you a question. This is the question I'm asking everyone to start things off.
Okay.
What do you love about being a woman?
Oh God, I wouldn't want to be anything else but a woman. I mean, let's start there. Um, Well, I mean, just the unlimited possibilities, right? I mean, essentially, we can do anything. I mean, absolutely anything. And so the width and the breadth of what's possible nowadays as a woman, and the ability to feel that deeply and still get things done, and be in the world, but also be totally, I mean, in my case, I live very secluded. So the ability to have so many different textures and flavors of who I can be, and how I can dress, and what I do and how I do it, even professionally, I wear several hats, and it's just really good being a woman in this day and age, and in where we live, of course. It's not true everywhere, but I would say the other thing that I love about being a woman is having a body that's highly responsive, and highly sensitive, and pleasure filled, and rage filled, and joy filled, and filled with boredom, and whatever else. So the depth of feeling and sensation is something that I tremendously enjoy, at least most of the time.
Yeah. So this has come up a lot in these conversations, you know, women talking about that full depth and that full range and all the emotions, and owning and experiencing all of them, and not being selective, and not like fitting ourselves into, you know, what handful of things we think are okay.
Yeah.
So were you always like this, or how did you come into being like, yeah, I get to feel and experience everything?
Um, I think I was always built like this. I've also had a teacher for a long time, so I was mentored very properly very early on. I also have a very highly responsive mother who isn't in any which way suppressed when it comes to, her feelings and emotions and things like that. Um, and also a highly responsive father. So I grew up in a household where emotions were a good thing, and where there were uh, lots of opportunities to see my parents also interact with each other in a certain way that was quite lovely. So I think I had some of that, but I'm also Austrian, and Austrians are not necessarily famous for being, that far out there. Some Austrians are, but they, like I did, I guess, left the country at some point. So I definitely had a bit more of a proper streak in me. And like many people, particularly also because of my education, I was a lot more politically correct than I am these days. And so um, I had a very pivotal moment. I think I said this to Alexandra, Entheus Alexandra once in an interview. I had a very pivotal moment of a realization around no longer trying to fit in certain ways that wasn't me in a more public context, and that was a conversation I had on the phone with Clarissa Pinkola Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves,
Yeah.
who I had a longer phone conversation with. And in the course of this phone conversation, it took a few hours, um, I got to really feel what it feels like when a woman is absolutely, unabashedly herself. Um, and she's a total genius, and she's very shrewd and just all over the place. And we were telling stories, and she's of Hungarian descent, and I'm Austrian, and it was just this odd, all over the place, really creative, fantastic, um, conversation we had. That really we had gotten the actual conversation we had to have out of the way in 15 minutes, and then the rest was just a walk down the garden path. And at the end of that conversation, this must have been in my mid 30s, um, I hung up and I was like, wow, I want to be like this when I grow up. And then the next thing was like, shit, I am grown up.
Ah!
What am I waiting for? And there was something in this conversation, even though it didn't center around me at all, that gave me permission to be a lot more me. Um, and then, of course, the other things that happened over the years is, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been counseling people for about 22 years now, and teaching for 15. So there comes a moment where beating around the bush just isn't effective anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the last piece to be said about how did I get here, or was I always that way, is there was also a moment where I stopped caring if people liked me or not. Um, and that probably was the greatest freedom of all, where it's just like, well, don't want to hang with me, don't hang with me.
Yeah.
And not in a rude way of alienating people for the sake of alienating people. I only join in Facebook conversations when I think it's useful for everyone involved, not just because
Yeah.
I'm foaming at the mouth.
Right.
Those I usually write and don't send. But there's just, so not everybody will like me. It's fine.
Yeah. I love that so much. And that's exactly what you just said, that you got out of that conversation, which, by the way, I reached out to Clarissa Pinkola Estes to be part of this, and I never heard back, and it's okay. But if you have not, you being not Michaela, but women watching, if you've not ever read or listened to Women Who Run with the Wolves, get your hands on it. Yeah. I personally, I didn't make it through the book reading, but when I got it on Audible, I've listened to it over and over again. Her stories are super beautiful. Her voice is super beautiful. And it's that permission-giving type of stuff where you're like, I get to be myself, and who am I, and it's okay. And that's the whole point of this interview series as well. So thank you for bringing her up and mentioning that. The last thing you said, though, I think is so big for all women, is that needing to be liked, that wanting to be liked. I think that's a very basal human desire to belong. But I think women especially have that people pleaser thing. It doesn't matter whether it's more so than men, but I bet you encounter this a lot from all different types of women in your work. It sounds like you already had the strong emotional foundation, so maybe to be I don't need to care what people think anymore. Might have been easier for you than others, maybe not, but I bet you work with people who have a hard time with it. How do you counsel them through? Literally, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, it's something that you have to grow into, essentially, right?
Yeah.
You can't force growth, as you know.
Mm.
It's a but what I do a lot, because I teach these women's workshops, amongst other things, but in the women's workshops, we often do a piece where women get to feel what it feels like to say no in their body,
Mm.
and actually work with the body on embodying a strong no, and then also embody a strong yes, and also feel, there's pieces where we feel our mothers and our mothers yeses and nos and all of that, and in that kind of an exploration, it becomes very clear what of the people pleasing is just habitual, and what of it is kind of traumatic,
Yeah.
right? And then once that's pulled apart, you can deal with it. You deal with the traumatic imprints one way, and you deal with the habitual imprints a different way. But there is definite ways to just not care that much anymore. But the other thing I wanted to say about that is, I think that people pleasing in its very nature is what's made us survive, right? It's gotten a bit wonky, because when you really think about it, in the olden days, olden meaning cave days, tribal days, um, all the women in a tribe getting along and all the women in a tribe cooperating is what granted, you know, help in childbirth, help with child rearing, help with cooking, with procuring food, with growing food. So women cooperating with women once was the most important thing, because men came and went, right? They got killed in the hunt or in wars or things like that. But the women, if they could survive within the tribe, had to rely on each other. So, um, I think inborn we have a certain people pleasing gene, so to speak. And then societally, for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's been made such that, dissent isn't okay. And that will take another 50 years probably till we grow out of it completely.
Yeah, it's on the rise though. There are a lot of, like yourself, like all the women in this series, so many women stepping up and being like, "Nope, I'm just not doing things the way I thought I was supposed to, or the
Yeah.
way things have been." So I'd love, you mentioned your workshops and the work that you do, and I'd love to have you chat about that a little bit, because you describe your work as yogic. And I think, here in Western culture, we mostly think of yoga as, go to a vinyasa flow class or Bikram yoga, and it's mostly asana, right? Like the movement practice of yoga.
Mhm.
And there's so many other parts that most of us don't even know about. So can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I can tell you how I use
Yes,
it,
yes,
right?
yes, in your
Different people
context.
use different ways of describing this. So, I would consider myself, I mean, very loosely, in coming out of tantric traditions. And when I'm saying very loosely, as you know, it's been, wildly bastardized in the West for all kinds of reasons. But uh, the main focus of the both of the people who taught me over the years, um, and their teachers and so on, has been um, realization through embodiment, or awakening through embodiment, living as embodiment, which of course includes things like actually inhabiting your body fully, using your body as a vehicle to merge with another body and then into oneness. Which is, there's other traditions where you essentially leave the body, you ascend, and you find oneness that way. There's, so in everything that I believe in and that I was taught and that I teach, it's all about inhabiting this body fully and pressing light, so to speak, however you want to say that, through the body for the sake of greater opening to all beings in a certain way. Um, Within that context, there's different trajectories, and mostly, and that's why I'm saying I only consider myself loosely in the tantric practices as they are practiced, particularly here in the US, um, because I actually am not that interested in healing. I think because of the way I was raised, both from my parents and from the woman who taught me first, I had a woman teacher first, um, it was considered that you were only taught these practices when you were emotionally, sexually, and psychically well. So what, the all the sexual practices that are done nowadays in Tantra, um, you would do 10 years into it having been ascertained that you're not going to lose your shit the first time you do these things, and that you're not going psychotic, and yet you didn't have sexual trauma. While in the West, and mostly also in Europe, I just came back from teaching a huge tour in Europe, people with sexual trauma go into tantric work for the sake of healing themselves. And sometimes they do, but because most people are not that skilled, sometimes they just re-traumatize themselves over and over and over when their teacher, when they invite, and their teachers also inflict on them what has already been, inflicted before at a much younger age. So to me, the term yogic is is in opposition, or in conjunction. I just don't deal with the other part of therapeutic. So there's a therapeutic track of work, and there's a yogic track of work. And the therapeutic track of work would take into account the healing that needs to be done, the damage, the trauma response triggers, how, self-help, personal growth, all of those kind of things fall into the therapeutic domain. And what I consider the yogic domain is you've ascertained what you're capable of and what you're not, and you're dealing with what you are not in a therapeutic track. You always should do both.
Yeah.
Never. That's the other thing. People bypass the therapeutic straight into the yogic, or even worse, into the spiritual. To me, there's therapeutic, yogic, and spiritual. We'll talk about spiritual later. I'd never consider myself a spiritual teacher. On the contrary, I'm a very unspiritual teacher because I'm on a different track. And so the yogic track to me is the track where you ascertain what you're capable of, or, have a pretty close idea, and you work with somebody, in this case me, who feels where you have contractions around the deepest expression, the fullest expression, and deals with it yogically, which means very much like you said, in an asana practice, so to speak, where you feel how your body reacts to certain postures, and then you work with that, and you work on the opening and relaxing and widening into that posture without injuring yourself, but also not backing off.
Yeah.
So my line of work is much more like a sports coach or a high performance coach, where I'm somewhat making myself responsible for pushing somebody as far as they need to be pushed for maximum performance without injuring them. But it's not a, oh, let's take our time and deal with your childhood wounds kind of an approach. It's a, you're dealing with your childhood wounds over here, and if they're very bad, I wouldn't, then this is not appropriate. But let's see how much we can relax you into who you already are. And so it's yoga in the it's a psycho-emotional asana, so to speak, right? Often I put people into certain exercises that are very much like a yoga asana. You do it, it feels completely bizarre. I mean, pigeon, right? Pigeon has no practical application to life.
It's not a functional movement.
It's not a functional movement. However, when you're done with pigeon, when you walk out into the world, your hips are wide open, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the things I do are like that. They're not functional motions. People go, "What the hell is she? Why? Fuck you! Don't want to do that." And then 3 weeks later, I get the email. Holy shit! I
Yeah.
didn't even know that this was possible, because there's no clear correlation between the asana, so to speak, and how it occurs in the world.
Yeah.
So that's how I make the differentiation between therapeutic and yogic. Now, as far as I'm concerned, just to finish this track
Yeah.
off, spiritual, isn't, I don't know how to say that. You don't have to do anything on the spiritual track. You either recognize everything arising as perfect oneness, or however you want to say it, right? Different people say it different ways, or you don't, right? You're either, arising in the midst of the perfection of existence, or you don't. And practicing isn't necessarily going to get you enlightened. Otherwise, we'd have a whole bunch of very enlightened people, which we don't.
Ah,
Right?
it's true.
Yeah. So,
So you said something, and this may or may not be a little edgy, may or may not be a little bit judgmental, but I dig it, and I know I can ask you this question. And I really want your opinion, and I'm glad you're not PC, because I would love for you to just tell me how you feel about this. So this is something that I'm very careful of myself, because I work with people on embodiment, but I do more the healing track, like you were talking
yes.
about. I do help people, heal these wounds, but I can also take people a little, getting them. It kind of feels to me in this moment like I kind of prep people to be ready for like your kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of teachers who would call themselves healers, spiritual, this, that, or the other thing. And you brought up Tantra. And I remember asking a mentor of mine how she felt about that whole topic. And she said, she's like, I think there's a lot of a darkness in that community, a lot of unhealed wounds. And it's really actually unsafe and irresponsible the way a lot of people are practicing in that community. So the way I want to ask the question is, I feel like you have great discernment around what is true and what is not. How would you help people navigate the waters of a lot of really healthy teachers and practitioners out there and the ones who aren't?
Yeah. It's not easy. And, I mean, you are on Facebook, I'm on Facebook, right? You see stuff where you just go, how? What? Right? It's incomprehensible. Um, and I have great discernment because I've been doing it for a long time. I also have a very strong inbuilt bullshit detector,
Yeah,
right? And I'm sure some people think I'm totally full of shit. So
right.
that's how it goes. But um, when somebody has trauma of any kind, right? I mean, their parents didn't love them, or their parents abandoned them, or they have actual sexual trauma, or they have abuse trauma. Of course, the earlier, the worse it is. People tend to seek out and be attracted to the very things that reinforce the way that they experience love. And so there's a certain kind of track that people can't get off because they have to live something out. And when I see that, I usually just try and provide some context for that and step back. But often, what's really I don't even know how to say it because it's so astounding. Often I speak with people, and even people who've studied with me for a while, and suddenly they're going to some gatherings where strange men have their hands inside of women that they've just met, and there's like fumbling and G-spot searching, and sacred hand jobs, and God knows what the fuck is out there. I was saying yesterday, I was teaching a class and I said, I haven't really figured out what's the difference between a sacred hand job and a regular hand job. But I think it's you light a candle, you bow before, and you say namaste after. So, I mean, that is a very judgmental thing to say because
Yeah.
there's good people doing good work out there. But the good people who are doing good work out there are given a very bad name by people who think that what essentially was done in the 60s, right? Because all of the stuff that's existing now existed in the 60s. It's really funny. I had somebody come by the other day, and he's like 23 or 24, and he was telling me lives in San Diego now. And don't you live in San Diego now?
Yeah.
And there's this amazing community, and they all believe in sharing partners. And he was telling me this, and I'm 47, so I didn't actually experience this myself, but my parents did, and I grew up with, with that kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, this is not new.
Yeah.
But this is what the 60s did, and look what happened to the people in the 60s. They didn't become enlightened.
Yeah. So it's funny, right? Because is that the outcome? Is that the outcome people are seeking? And I love, and again, I don't mind. Like, we're humans. I love Byron Katie because she's like, listen, like, you're going to judge people. So it's not about trying so hard not to judge. It's just what you do with it when you observe that it's happening. And I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah. And I'm saying all of these saying, um, I have tendencies like everybody else, and I want to explore certain things and have explored a lot of things. Um, and I'm not actually judgmental about people having multiple partners and have multiple relationships and
right.
doing drugs, and and I mean, that's not the thing. I think there is a place and a time for all of that. The way that I look at it is, if somebody comes to me and they are in fact wider open than they used to be, and there's a brightness, and there's an expansion, and there's a freedom, and I look at them and they're telling me these things, and they are in fact brighter, right, lighter, however you want to call it, great. But when people come to me and they're telling me how they need to spend like 3 or 4 days, 3 or 4 hours a day processing the multiple partners that everybody's having, and you can tell they're like crunched and it's painful, and they somehow think that this pain is helping them grow and they're on their edge. But you can actually see it grinds them down, over periods of time. And it doesn't solve anything, and it actually just reinforces the unlove that they experienced as children. um, that's very dangerous to me. And I always think that um, it's also, there's always an exception to these things, right? And I've done some of the things that I'm condemning right now, in the right kind of context. But in general, when you have a teacher and that teacher engages with you sexually, it can't be anything good coming from it, um, simply because of the dynamics that are set up between somebody who teaches and somebody who's being taught.
Yeah.
So, um, to kind of um, be sexually engaged with somebody that you're teaching, to me always feels way too complicated for the outcome,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's just that just feels like there must be better ways to do it and cleaner ways to do it, where it doesn't become so messy and fraught with the projections and all of that. But then some people like that.
Yeah. So this is great. You said a couple things here that I'm taking little notes so I don't forget to go back on some of this stuff. So you do, I mean, since you work mostly in the realm of like intimacy and sexuality and sensuality and those things, this is primarily what we're talking about when we talk about practitioners,
Yes.
and so for people watching, I know for me, I've only been in that world or even like exploring that world for like a year and a half, like not very long. So that's why I still consider myself a novice. That's why you won't find me teaching about these things. Like, I might talk about it, but that's why I find people like you and a couple of the other people in these interviews, because not that I think it's required for mastery, but I just personally, my own discernment point is I just naturally trust people who've been doing things longer. Because I love what you said about that you've tried some of these things that you're condemning, and how would you know if you hadn't? But I feel like there's also a piece
Exactly.
of reverence and safety that is kind of underpinning everything you just said, which I really appreciate. So you brought up this idea, which we see a lot in personal development, not just around like sex and intimacy, but everything,
Mhm.
pushing people to their edge.
Mhm.
And I've seen a lot of people, I've done this myself too. It becomes this cycle of always looking for the next edge.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that could be really friggin' draining.
Yes. Yes.
So talk about the process of, you know, how do you recommend or how do you take your own people through, okay, you just experienced something, take some friggin' time in between before you go into the next thing.
Mhm. Well, I think that the basic premise, and this brings us back to what you said earlier with teachers and teachers, or tantra and tantra, right? The differences. When the basic premise is that you are broken, and if you could just learn a few more techniques or sexual tricks or embodiment, teachings or whatever it is, or success coaching or money coaching or whatever, then you would be good. Then you would be loved. Then your life would be fine. You are on a slippery slope because essentially shit can go down any moment, right? I could die right here, right now. You could die right there, right now. Let's hope not, but it could, right? We're flooding, forecast for today. I mean, everything can be taken immediately, and so the whole premise that something is wrong with me or with you or with somebody I teach, and if I can teach them what I know, then they will be better. That in itself is a huge problem. And often you find that there's teachers, um, and I see this a lot because I'm kind of a person who always has teachers show up and want to be taught. So I've seen a lot of people come through my workshops over the years, and David's workshops, who are teachers in their own right. And you can tell that they need, not everybody, but some people, they just need to feel acknowledged. They need to be better than, they need to have accomplished something that they can feel proud of because that's their makeup. So in that particular paradigm, the person who teaches makes themselves better than, the person who's being taught. And then the next thing that happens, which is of course the complete mind fuck, is if you really had it and you gave it to that person, they should have reached their goal and they should be happy. And then they don't have to come back. Right? So not good marketing. Whole religions are based on giving, only partial information so that there is a need to come back. I mean, religions and cults are based on that. So it's a slippery slope that I battle with a lot,
Yeah.
which is how do you give somebody skills which are important, and pushing somebody to the edge is important, but not from a place of them not being good enough, which is the whole thing, right? Particularly in men's work these days, and it's getting there in women's work too, particularly in the realm of masculine, feminine. You're not feminine enough. You're not in your feminine right
Yeah,
now.
I
Oh
know.
God, my man is so not masculine. Bullshit. Does he have a penis? Does he have a masculine essence? He is masculine and he's a male. Can't be taken, right? There is feminine essence males, but there's not that many. But, you know, he has the equipment, he has the disposition. Everything else is a personal peeling back of layers and not a layering on more shit in order to become something that you naturally are. Same's true, when you talk about unleashing, um, what's true in a woman. There is nothing wrong ever to begin with.
Yeah.
Everything that's perceived as wrong is perceived on rejection or perceived rejection even, um, of who we are. But who we are underneath is complete goodness
Yeah.
and very deeply feminine and very wild and very wise and very, um, you know, feral almost. That's just waiting to be, um, uncovered. So it's like
Yes.
rags, right? That have to be shoveled aside. So there isn't really the 12 steps to a better life and the 16 pointers toward something. It's more the stop, feel, feel what's happening, be with what's happening. Don't put shit on top of the perfection of who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my edge pushing is the edge pushing of feeling backwards, inwards, downwards into what's actually happening. and learning how we've learned to cope in order to not have to feel and in order not to have to deal with the pains of having been rejected and all of that, and to take all of that away, which can also involve quite edgy stuff and quite confronting stuff, but it's for the sake of coming back and not for the sake of going somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
I love that point so much. So, two things that you've said here that have come up over and over in these conversations, which when that happens, it's just like, yes, because it's that friggin' important, is getting to the place of feeling. And then this idea of going back in instead of moving forward is like the sense of remembering. It's like the whole concept of untame the wild soul woman. Like, you're already in there. You're already in there. Exactly. You've always been the way you are. You've always been who you are. But like you're saying, it just gets covered up.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, and I love this, so you mentioned David earlier. So if anyone watching doesn't know who she means, it's David Deida. And I love the concept of the feminine and the masculine essence, because what you just said, what you just brought up, was actually a struggle of mine for a couple years. I was told, you're very masculine, you should be more feminine. And because at the time I didn't know any better, and I wasn't comfortable or trusting in my own body, and I wasn't really feeling what was true for me yet, I also didn't have a concept of what feminine really meant, and I assumed it meant like prissy and girly. And I felt really defeated around that, because that's just not me. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not dainty, I'm not delicate, like I'm not a little princess fairy, which, you know, I say all that, it sounds like I have disdain. I don't. I actually really enjoy when women are that way, because I think women are really beautiful, and I get to kind of soak it up and experience it because it's not me. Yeah. So, through many different like teachings and books and workshops and just being around all different types of women, I have a much better understanding, and I embrace my own. But I would love, because I love the way you all teach about the feminine and the masculine essence. Can you chat about that a little bit, and just brief overview, just to give people that perspective?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, one of the biggest misconceptions is, of course, that people conflate masculine with male and feminine with female, you know, and it couldn't be any more wrong. And it's kind of a personal sadness of mine that, you know, David, who really was the first one who, David Deida, I should say, you know, who was the first one to really flesh out these concepts, is kind of a little bit maligned these days, and people look down on him because of people who have parroted his things and can't make a differentiation between men and masculine and women and feminine. And that does a real disservice to everyone, because the masculine in each human is the part that drives things forward and that makes goals and that is capable of having a long view and working towards something and has clarity and decisiveness. The feminine in each human is the part that has that rapidly moving, flowing, emotional, also mental, you know, like just winding path of going from one to the other, swirl, chaos, kind of a flow that's highly creative. And the feminine in all of us loves beauty and nature and textures and colors. The masculine in all of us likes empty spaces and a certain sparseness and a certain kind of linearness. That's always both there. And of course, you know, you can look around my place and it's not particularly sparse under any circumstances, because I'm a much more feminine creature, but I have a very strong masculine. And you know, I'm very organized, I'm very driven, very goal-oriented. I can get shit done. I mean, really can get shit done. And I'm also, you know, I have employees and people have to tell what to do, and I teach, which in itself is a very masculine thing. You know, giving directions, where do people step, and all of that. But both of these things are there, and both of these things can be used. And the only reason to ever orient towards your essence, what, you know, as much as you can, is during sex, or the when I'm saying during sex, not only intercourse, but anything that's sexual between, you're in my case, a man and a woman, or, you're two women, two men, doesn't matter. In that moment, it's good to be able to animate your essence, not at work. It's actually inappropriate. This is a big, 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 big pet peeve of mine when women come to me and they go, I want to learn how to be in my feminine while doing business. You don't. It's highly inappropriate to be in your feminine while you're doing business, unless, excuse my language, you want to fuck everyone in your office. Okay? It is not. It's not. If I go to work, I did a consulting job for a year and a half in London that involved board meetings and things like that. If I go to work and in those board meetings where it's all men, I am my best feminine self, that's highly violent.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, so I'll give you a classic example. This is something that I talk about ever so often because it's such an insane realization. I'm in this meeting, and there's six men. Everybody's in a suit. I'm in a suit, like in a dress with the covered from head to toe, and we're all sitting there, and they're going over reports. It was financial stuff, and we're going over reports, and I'm there to observe the meeting because I'm evaluating certain people and stuff like that. Um, and somebody makes a joke, and I laugh. And as I'm laughing, my body relaxes and my head goes back, and and suddenly every man in the room's eyes were right here. And nobody was looking at me anymore. It was all on my neck because there was a motion, right? And in that particular moment, I realized um, that just that little bit of motion, that little bit of flow or shine or whatever, distracted everyone from what they were doing. So on my end, it felt highly violent because I didn't want to be seen as a sexual being in that particular moment. It was highly inappropriate. They're doing business. They're also not my men,
Yeah.
right? Um, I knew some of the women of those men, so uh, I mean, I'm very puritanical that way, even though I'm so not. But
Yes.
I don't want any guy that I work with go home and think about me instead of his woman or fantasize or
Yeah.
anything like that. I don't want that. I don't want to, it's not my thing. There is women who want that because it gives them a sense of self and self-esteem and all of that. And there is also, when you're younger, there's a moment where you have to have ascertained that you got it, right? That's a given. But where I'm sitting, I don't want to be felt that way unless I want to be felt like that,
Yeah.
right? And so when I'm with my husband, then I want to be felt like that. There's a few other people with whom I have that kind of clean exchange, and some of my girlfriends that I don't mind them seeing me like that. But for everyone else, my sexual essence, my sexuality, my shine, uh, that's when I'm doing business, that's not what I want to give to somebody. When I'm
Yeah.
with my girlfriends in a room, all bets are off, right? But out in a boardroom, I don't want to be feminine.
Yeah. So this is a really you're kind of like, I'm feeling like the mind blown. I feel like I'll be one of those people a couple days from now sending you an email being like, "Oh my God," like it clicked. But this is what I'm loving. So something that's come up a lot in some of these other interviews is the concept of boundaries and
Yes.
and preferences. And I love that you're honoring, this is my preference, this is my boundary in this context, this is how I am in this context. And I really hope if you're watching this interview, you're feeling the permission, if you even needed it, you might not have, to be who you are in whatever setting.
Yeah.
And that it's not out of integrity, that you may be one way in one environment and another way in another. Because I think that is part of the feminine essence, like that shapeshifter, right? Or not even, but just having the discernment like you said, we all humans have both. I have
Yeah.
my masculine energy. I have my feminine energy. It's almost like having this toolbox and walking into a
Exactly.
situation and evaluating, cool, what do I need to pull out of the toolbox to be the most effective? And
Exactly.
yeah, so
And integrous,
yes,
right?
yes,
Most
yes.
effective and integrous. When I do business, my feminine is not the best, the most effective tool, because in my feminine, I am highly all over the place and I don't really care about anything that requires, um, you know, that requires some masculine strengths of mine. So, I'll give you another example of how this is often misconstrued. Often, what happens is men and women alike come home from work, partners. Like I said, the masculine and the sexual essence are for sexual partnership. They're not for children, parents, co-workers, um, non-sexual friends, right? It's for that only, where one person animates a strong feminine, one person animates a strong masculine for the sake of having this massive arc of sexual attraction or sexual polarity, as we call it.
Yeah.
That's what it's for. It's to polarize. It's not, you don't want to polarize the grocery clerk. I mean, maybe you do, but I don't, right? It's not the best use of your shine, so to speak, right? Unless you need constant self referencing as that you are okay. But most of us at one point grow out of that, because it's also, like you said, it's super exhausting. But
Yeah.
let's just say you and your man, you don't go out to work, but let's just say you would be going out to work, and then you come home and you've both animated a strong direction, which is considered the masculine, all day. You've been telling people what to do all day. He's been telling people what to do all day. Now you want to reconnect with your feminine.
Yeah.
And I know you know how to do that. You put some music on, you start shaking the ass and it out, and taking the clothes off that were the appropriate work clothes, and blah, 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 blah. He, on the other hand, has to do the same, right? Because if you want to animate your strong feminine for the sexual occasion, and he wants to animate his strong masculine for the sexual occasion, but he's been super masculine all day, he'll need a break.
Yeah.
It's highly fascist to require from our men that they have to stay in that track
Yes.
all the time. So when women say to me, well, he comes home and he's all in his feminine and I hate it, it's like, cut the poor bastard a break. Right?
It's true. And I'm laughing because I don't know if you know this or not, but Mike and I moved in together like 2 months ago. And I've never lived with a partner before, and I have botched that a lot.
Yes. Yes. Oh, do I have done it too?
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been married for a long time now, and I've done it too. But the trick is that you do that away from each other, because
Yes.
it's not a turn on
Yeah.
to see your guy slumped over the remote control with a beer and, looking lazy and checked out. Um, it's not a turn on, but it's necessary.
Yeah. I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
So the whole dogma about how we have to be is a tough one. And the last thing I want to say is, when you relax enough and when you feel enough, you know how to be naturally, right? So even though I do teach, practices like most people do, I look at these practices as something that you do so that you have it in your muscle memory and your body memory and in your subtle body and, wherever you want to have it, so that when you relax enough to feel the other deeply, you naturally know what arises and what needs to happen. Then you have the tools, but you're not using the tools because you don't know what the fuck's happening, which is how most people do it, right? In self-help, you have tools, you have tricks, you have the 10 bullet points here and this there. You've now learned how to breathe this way and stand that way. And all of those things numb you to what's really happening.
Yeah. Well, because
So
you're thinking about it. How can you feel if you're in your head trying to
exactly,
do all the
exactly.
steps?
Exactly. So the way to work with this in the way that I work with it is you learn the depth of relaxation, the core of your being that allows you to then seamlessly wield your different swords and tools and screwdrivers and whatever else. Like I love those Hindu icons with the many arms,
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
is like that. You develop all these different tools and textures, and in all these Hindu, you've seen that they have
Yeah,
different tools
yes,
in different
yes.
hands, or different ritual objects. So it's a little bit like that. You have all these arms so that you can wield them as it occurs, based on feeling the other. And the last thing I want to say about that, and everything in my work is about that, is you have to learn how to feel yourself first
Yeah.
and sensitize to your own sensations. And when you can do that, you become resonant with the other. And then you can feel what the other feels as easily as you can feel what you feel.
Yeah. So this is it's so good, and it could go so much deeper. Like we could keep doing this all friggin' day. So if you're watching this and maybe you might feel a number of things. You might be confused, you might be turned on, you might be like, "Yes, oh my god, now I have so many questions." On Michaela's website, which is her name, michaelaboehm.com, which you can spell from the bio below the interview. She has her lineup of workshops that are happening. And also you recently put out, because I downloaded them, I haven't listened to all of it yet, a couple audios too.
And there's a
So,
lot more coming in January.
oh, cool. So
Yeah.
this won't be live till February. So by the time you're watching this, there will be more available at
Yes.
michaelaboehm.com. If you want this deeper exploration and deeper understanding, don't judge yourself. Don't feel bad if you're like, because even me, like I study, I read, I have a pretty firm grasp on many of these things, and I'm still sitting with some of what she just said, going, I definitely need to be with that a little bit more, so I feel like I fully understand it. So, yeah, so good. Look, the sun is all shining on your face now as
Oh,
we're wrapping up.
exactly.
Super
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Ah, so good. So,
I,
women, check out the rest of the interviews in the series. Check out Michaela. Thank you all for watching, for your time as well, and we'll see you all later.
Right, so for your husband or your boyfriend, don't judge him and say you are lazy, or like you're an asshole, or you are blank. Like that's just a judgment. And as a man, anytime I'm judged, I shut down. So I shut down all the any kind of communication pathways that we have. Those just get shut down. But when when Liz shares, you know what, like I'm feeling really overwhelmed because of this, or I'm feeling a lot of fear because of this, or I'm, what you said was really hurtful, and that really hurt my feelings. And that's it. When she just shares her experience, then I can feel into the pain that I caused. Then I can feel into the reality of what my actions are causing in our relationship.